So I'm just going to give my off the cuff opinion about several things. And I hope people really consider that oftentimes, we see people trying to figure out how do we fix our country. And that's going to always be a challenge simply because we're sinners. People are messy. If you look through history, it's just the stories of a bunch of messy people, and people are still messy. And so you're still going to have lots of problems. But what I find very interesting is that the human tendency is to point our finger and look at someone else to blame. 5, 6 years ago is millennials are terrible. Millennials are ruining everything. They're selfish and entitled and lazy. Blah, the millennials. Now it's Gen Z is a mess. Gen Z is selfish and entitled and terrible. Then you have the other crowd. Boomers. Boomers ruined America. Boomers don't understand. We just need the boomers to go away. Boomers destroyed everything. Then you have people who want to point their finger. It's the black people, it's the white people, it's the Jews, it's the women, it's the men. And it's just so ignorant. It's so ignorant because the problem has always been humanity's sin nature. Okay. If you read scripture, we learn how we are new creatures in Christ. Why? We're still human, but we have a new nature. And our country only succeeds the more people who give their lives to Christ and live out our Christian faith in the public square. Every generation has problems. They do. Every generation has a certain set of issues that are unique to that generation based on what was happening in the country at the time. And, when people look at Gen Z and go, they're a mess. Well, who raised them? You look at millennials, they're a mess. Who raised them? So at some point you got to say, well, who raised these people that's so terrible? And then you start to just look back and look back and look back and see that there were a myriad of issues happening at the time external to each generation that the parents weren't properly equipped to deal with. And this is some of the problem of us living in a fallen world. That doesn't excuse individuals for their bad behavior. Let it excuse generational issues, but we definitely need some context. And I think that the each generation had their own problems, and each generation, I would say, starting with the baby boomers, parents were not necessarily equipped to deal with whatever their kids were up against. My opinion is that baby boomers were the first generation to be really to experience an onslaught of the globalist called psyop. In addition to that, baby boomers were the first generation to grow up with TV. My opinion. Now, I haven't done extensive research on this, and this is the topic I'm going to go into for a lot of reasons. There is, and I'm going to pause right there. There is an effort constantly in our country to pit us against each other, whether through race, gender, generation, pit the older against the younger, pit us against each other based on ethnicity, pit men against women. And some of these actors are not just organically frustrated people. Some of these actors are actually globalists called assets who are there to engineer chaos in America so we can implode and be served up to a techno fascist state. But I'm not going to get off into that today. But the rage at baby boomers is just really ridiculous. First of all, as I said, they were the first generation to grow up with TV. Now, we can say each generation was the first to have something, like Gen X had cable TV. And then with millennials, we dealt with the internet, and we had other things that we dealt with. And then now Gen Z, they're the ones who the first to have social media and be digital natives, you know. But as we look at the incoming generations or up and coming generations, we are a little more prepared to deal with the digital world because now our minds can conceptualize. We realize that we're at a point where we are in a unseen territory, that this technology thing, whether it's AI or anything else, it can really go anywhere. But for baby boomers, their greatest generation, a silent generation parents, these are people born, the greatest generation of people, I believe, born but like between maybe 1915 to maybe like 1929. And then greatest generation of the silent generation are people born like I think like 1929 or 1930 to like 1940, 1945. Okay. Their parents didn't have TV. Their parents grew up with radio. So the thought of having this little box in your house that your child just sits in front of and just is inundated with messages, it must have blown their minds. Additionally, as I said before, the baby boomers were the first generation to be hit with a bunch of government psyops at a mass scale, because that was the first generation to grow up with mass media and a visual mass media in that regard. Previous generations had, since the printing press, simply just had printed materials. Think about that. Since the Gutenberg printing press, and forgive me, I don't have the exact date. So say roughly for 300 years. I don't know when the printing press was founded. We're going to find out very quickly, because this adds some context what I'm saying regarding just the rapid rate at which society accelerated. So the Gutenberg printing press was founded in 1440. Okay. 1440. Now, I'm not sure when the radio was created, but 1440 to, let's say, 1920, when radios became more prominent. Okay. So for almost 500 years, almost 500 years, humans had roughly the same type of communication, advanced communication, which was the printing press, which changed a lot of things. But beyond print material, until maybe, like you could say, maybe the pictures in the 19th century, that was definitely changed. So say 400 years, we had the same type of mass communication system, which was printed material. And then came the 19th century pictures, then came radio, then TV. So you can see for roughly 400 years, things pretty much stayed the same regarding technology. And then with each subsequent generation, it just got faster and faster and faster and faster. So baby boomers not only grew up with the first generation, grew up with TV, but then they were being hit with messaging while they were watching TV when they were kids. And do you really think their parents who grew up with radio were really prepared to inoculate and protect their children from the programming that was hit from with the TV? They grew up during the Cold War, where they were afraid of Russia bombing us. They grew up watching images in the civil rights movement of people being blasted away and attacked by dogs. What I mean, blasted away with holes and attacked by dogs. That's what they grew up watching. They grew up watching the Vietnam War. That was the first time war was put on a visually, in video form. That was the first time war was put in front of people's faces in that regard. And also, when you look at the Vietnam War, I don't know if people have ever done to a deep dive in the Vietnam War. The more that I've studied the Vietnam War and all the politics around that, the more angry I become. And I even start to ask myself, how many just wars have we actually fought in? There was no reason for us to fight in the Vietnam War. Then you have on that, you had the CIA, which many of these these three-letter agency operatives were former Nazi scientists who came over after World War II. And then you start to look into the CIA with their programming with individuals like Timothy Leary that was going on college campuses to intentionally encourage the college kids to do hard drugs. I don't think that the silent generation and the quote unquote greatest generation, I say that because these are the names of the generations, I don't think that they experienced anything like that. I remember when I was in college, my professor told us, it was a baby boomer, how when he was in college, his professor used to do drugs with him. Then you have kids being encouraged to do drugs by these CIA assets on their college campuses. A lot of the Vietnam vets are coming back strung out on heroin. That's what's going on. These guys are in the middle of the jungle. They're scared. They've been drafted into the army. They're in the jungle fighting guerrilla warfare and have all types of hard drugs available for them. Then you look at the media, the entertainers who were presented to the baby boomers, who a lot of them were followers of Aleister Crowley, a Satanist. They were pushing Eastern mysticism. They were pushing the sexual revolution. That was the first generation to have the sexual revolution pushed on them mass scale. Previous generations didn't deal with it. Now, there were pockets of people. You always had pockets of degenerates. There's a book that I've picked up that I'm going to start reading called God's Funeral. And it posits that the decline of Western civilization actually began in the Victorian period, which I do agree with. But I'm not going to go further than that statement because I haven't read the book and read the author's claims. But I largely believe that the downfall began way before baby boomers. I believe it began in the Victorian era after we had things like Darwinian evolution and other things that Karl Marxism being promoted in the kind of upper echelon of society, and then it naturally was taught in institutions, then trickled down from there. But again, I'm going to stick on topic. So not only that, they had their entertainers pushing them in a demonic direction. Young people are naturally rebellious. They don't need any help. They don't. But there was a heavily coordinated effort to funnel them in a particular direction. And the movies and the music and the drugs being promoted on a wide scale to young people and being celebrated in their entertainment. Then you get to 1975 and you look at the Church Commission where it talks about how that's not the only thing they cover. But one of the things they get into is how 3-letter agencies had Operation Mockingbird, where the globalist cult had their assets in the media manipulating the public. This was what's going on when our parents were growing up. And so they saw all this chaos, and younger people began to be more aware of world affairs because remember, prior to TV, people were very limited in what they knew. Oftentimes we look at certain parts of society as people were just kind of ignorant, uninformed. Again, when I think of how my grandparents grew up, they grew up in the country. I don't even think they had a radio. They didn't have indoor plumbing. My one grandfather grew up as an orphan. So these people, they grew up in rural areas and not necessarily poor. They didn't have like material. They didn't grow up starving. So my one grandfather, he actually did grow up hungry because he was an orphan. But aside from him, the rest of them didn't grow up poor in the sense of when we think of like they couldn't take care of themselves. No, they grew up on farms. So nobody was hungry, but they were farmers. So they had a completely different lifestyle. And you mix that with the only technology they have is uh is what's printed on a book. And then maybe if you go to a local place for some kind of entertainment, you maybe can gather around the radio. But that's it. Now you fast forward to baby boomers who now the cares of the world are just hitting them. It's the first generation to have that. The cares of the world just beating them on a mass scale, not just a couple people who had their nose in books and nose in newspapers, but at a mass scale, everybody's just being beat with the world around them. Then you have the young people's rebellious nature. Then you have what we learned through the church investigation with Operation Mockingbird and MK Ultra. Who knows what happened with that? Then you had all these Vietnam War vets coming home where the people are angry and protesting the war and they feel confused. Or did I waste my time? It was just so much. And you had the civil rights movement and all of that. And a lot of people were wondering like, wow, I didn't know it was really that bad for Black people in certain parts of America. You had all those elements going on. So you mix all of that together with people getting frustrated. And you got the Black Panther Party and you had the Marxist movement going. You throw all of that together. That's going to have a massive impact on any generation. And to sit and act like they just ruled the world, the thing about it is that baby boomers were so inundated with images of things happening poorly. It's like we want to fix it. Oftentimes they went about it the wrong way. And the same can be said for each generation. I just think that this whole like let's blame baby boomers is ridiculous because each generation has its own problems. You can look at Generation X. Y'all the ones who brought us nasty rap music and all this other vulgar music. I mean, a lot of the movies music that baby boomers would listen to was problematic, but it was close. You think of stuff like heavy metal and rap, the hell out of heavy metal is complete Satanism. Complete Satanism. And then you death metal, all that stuff, a lot of it. And you look at the nasty rap music, who brought that stuff? That was Gen X. Well, Uncle Luke, I would never forget my first time as a kid going to the music store to get CDs. and then saw the cover of one of Uncle Luke's albums. Again, my parents don't think that we just go into the CD store. And lo and behold, boom, it's the big old cover of Luke's album with all these women with their behinds all out. That was Gen X. Promoting rap music that encouraged dope dealing and pimping and hoeing and all this other stuff. That was Gen X. So my point is each generation has a set of problems. And we can point to any group of people and say this group of people disproportionately did this and that. And all of that to me is a waste of time. It's one thing to want to analyze things in society and try to decide, how we should solve a problem. What can we learn from history? That's one thing. But all the finger pointing and blaming is pathetic. Because ask yourself, what are you doing? What are you doing to go spread the gospel? What are you doing to better society? Not bumping your gums on the internet, keyboard warring with strangers, and probably a bunch of them are bots. What are you actually doing every day to make America a better place? And most people ain't doing anything. They just running their mouth. What are you doing? When the last time you shared the gospel with a stranger? Not arguing with somebody on the internet. When the last time you shared the gospel with a stranger? When the last time you paid attention to what actually was going on in this country? And I don't mean sitting here seeing what's on the algorithm has manipulated you to see. I mean, when have you actually looked to see what is my city council voting on? What is my county commissioner voting on? When is the last time you've done these things? You have to ask yourself, what am I actually doing to contribute to the solution? Or am I just running my mouth? Now, I'm going to explore this subject more with baby boomers, but I'm just about had enough of the let's blame baby boomer mouth. I'm so tired of it because to disrespect our elders in such a way, our elders have done so much to help us because you know what baby boomers did do? They gave their children some of the best childhoods ever in American history. That's something that baby boomers did. They provided their children with loving homes. When I grew up, I didn't have a care in the world. I had an amazing childhood thanks to my baby boomer parents. So to sit here and just dog out this generation like they're terrible, when each generation has contributed to some madness. Each one has its own set of problems. Why? Because we're sinners. We're sinners. And the solution to our problems isn't pointing fingers at each person. Now, let me clarify. I'm not saying it's not good to analyze challenges that each generation has created because each one has some challenges. But to try to dump the fall of America at the feet of one generation is complete nonsense. And I'm going to explore that topic a lot more. And I want to close and say, back up off our baby boomers. Those are our elders. And that many of them have done so much, and many of them have done harm, just like people from your generation. God bless.